Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. The webinar will start very soon. We are just waiting for a few more people to join. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. Thank you for being with us today. Welcome to this Climate Action Accelerator webinar. My name is Marie-Flore Michel, and I'm team leader of the Solution Unit at the Climate Action Accelerator. Today, we will try to answer with our guests today the question, which partnerships, services, and expertise to develop in order to deploy solar energy widely in the aid and health sector. So a couple of practical information here to start. You have the program in front of you. We will start with a very short introduction of the CAA, and then presentations from Doctors Without Borders, Operational Center Brussels, Electricians Without Borders, and UNITAR. And then we will have around 20 minutes for questions and answers in the end. Today, we mainly have attendees from aid and health organizations and also a couple of energy experts in the room. Before starting, a couple of information. This webinar is recorded and will be made available on replay on our website, along with all presentations from all our guests here today. Please keep your audio and video off at all time, unless you are given the floor by me during the Q&A session. To ask a question, please write in the chat or raise your hand. I will read the questions or give the floor to attendees during the Q&A session. So, the Climate Action Accelerator. The Climate Action Accelerator, CAA, is a non-profit organization based in Geneva, which aims to scale up climate action within the international aid sector and also the health sector. The CAA supports its partner organizations towards a radical transformation of their practices, enabling them to halve their emissions by 2030. So 16 aid organizations have joined the CAA so far and committed to reducing their emissions by 50% by 2030. These organizations benefit from the close support of the Climate Action Accelerator in building their climate and environmental roadmap and also action plans. We are also an official partner of the Race to Zero initiative of the UNFCCC. So let's go into the topic now. Why solar energy? Well, as you may know, probably know, 80% of the world's energy comes from fossil fuels, responsible for most greenhouse gas emissions. And when you look at the numbers per kilowatt-hour of electricity produced, here on the screen, you clearly see the difference between renewables and fossil fuels. And within the renewable sources of energy, solar represents a big opportunity, especially for the aid and health sectors, and especially in the field. Whether it's for headquarters or field infrastructure or even emergency operations, aid organizations consume energy mainly from fossil fuels today. But alternatives exist in many cases, and today we are going to talk about solar photovoltaics, because replacing generators is a big issue for aid organizations in the field. Replacing generators with solar photovoltaics can significantly reduce an organization's carbon footprint and also increase its overall resilience. It's not only about carbon footprint, it's also about resilience and not being too much dependent on fossil fuels and importations. So to produce solar energy, specific solar expertise is needed, either in-house, like you will see today with some of our guests, or externally. Various partners and private companies can offer such technical support from installation to maintenance. And basically, that's what we are going to discuss today with our guests. So our guests today, the first one, Iñaki Goicolea. He's the energy team leader at Doctors Without Borders, Brussels. We also have Tania Chauvin with us, Senior Project Manager from Electricians Without Borders. And last but not least, Mark Gibson, the operational lead of the Global Platform for Action at UNITAR. So let's go to our first presentation with Iñaki. Iñaki, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. So let me share the screen with everybody. Can you see the screen, Mariflor?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
All good.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. So as Mariflor is saying, my name is Iñaki Goicolea, and I'm the Energy and HVAC team leader with Doctors Without Borders. And we give technical support to all the MSF Belgium projects in the field in terms of energy and HVAC. And nowadays we have a lot of solar energy related projects. So we wanted to share our experience with these projects and to identify some success factors that we have identified in the last years in order to have an efficient solution in this regard, right? So we'll be covering from the beginning, from the definition of the needs, the design, the execution, and the operation and maintenance of the solar energy setups. So for us, one of the key points to consider comes right at the beginning, which means basically to know what do we want the solar energy for, right? In many projects, we hear that we want solar energy, but solar energy is actually a means to reach an end goal, which basically can be reducing your CO2 emissions, or you're reducing your fuel consumption, or having a more sustainable system. So that's basically what we want to know. What is your end goal with solar energy? And then based on that, we can define the next steps, which will help us to avoid any possible frustrations or maybe even unrealistic expectation that we have in some cases, right? So basically we always ask, and we have to know, what do we want to achieve with solar energy? In some cases, it's just having full autonomy. Some other cases is having fuel saving, but we have to know exactly how much fuel saving that we want to have. We want to reduce 40, 50% of the fuel that we are currently consuming, or maybe we want to go for a full off-site, off-grid solar energy setup, and we want to save 100% of the fuel, right? So that's one of the key things that we have to consider. And right with this, when we know the end goal, we might be able to tell the customer or the person we are supporting in the field that solar energy is not the only component in reaching that goal. There are other components related with the behavior, how you use the energy, more efficient installations, etc., that can help you to reach that goal, right? At the same time that you are installing solar energy. It's also very important for NSF. Then we can come into the design. And when it comes to designing the system, the basic thing that we have already identified is to have as much data and as accurate as possible on the system that you're designing. So we always try to have power monitors, like the one you have in the picture, to have an accurate information, and have an accurate picture of what is your current energy consumption in the place where you're going to be installing the solar energy, right? If it's a new installation, then we are forced to rely on theoretical estimations, which is fine, but again, if we can avoid this, we should, right? And then we always recommend, and we always do, I guess in MSF, we try to use specialized software to design solar energy setups, right? We have a bunch of software right now in the market, and the license of those software would be a fraction of the total cost of your energy installation. So we think it's really pertinent and relevant to invest in this type of software, because it's software that any electrician can use, and it really makes a difference. Okay. And then with the design of the system, we try to have all the information possible, right? According to the place, the solar radiation in your place, the type of battery that you want to use, and all the technical details that comes with the battery, the state of charge, etc., right? Those are very important things to know when you're using this type of software, right? And then when it comes to the execution, what we always identify as key aspects is to have a proper document with the proper technical specifications. If you're going to be outsourcing the installation, which at least in MSF is the most common, right? So we need to have these technical specifications both for the call for tender and for the contract, right? Very important. Then when it comes to outsourcing, we always try to work as much as possible with local or regional companies. In the countries where we're working, I'm talking about places like Afghanistan, Congo, South Sudan, Mali, Guinea, Haiti, etc. We try to stay in more and more local companies with a very high capacity and competencies for doing this type of solar energy installations, and they are able to do really complex and big solar installations with good quality materials, and they are able to do everything from the sourcing, the execution, to the operation and maintenance. So we try to rely on these companies as much as possible, because this is also a key factor in achieving success. Because then, if you, for whatever reason, the system doesn't finish at the end, or we want to maintain the system properly, you need to have a local company in order to do this. If you're relying on a partner that is based in another country far away, or even in another continent, then in the places that we have done this, we have had bad experiences. Then another aspect in the execution is the commissioning procedure. That's also very, very important to define a very exhaustive commissioning procedure. So we make sure that everything is done according to their technical specifications, and that the system is working as it's supposed to do. And then, as always, to have a close supervision of the works by the client, by myself in this case, ideally by someone with technical expertise in the matter and with time to do so, because it takes a good amount of time to supervise and to oversee the works, and it's also crucial because otherwise we might have surprises afterwards that are really difficult to change. So if we catch this from the beginning, you have a higher degree possibility of reaching your goal, right? And then the last but not least, obviously, as always, the operation and maintenance, as always, key when you are doing this type of solar installations, is not a one-off job. Of course, it's something that you have to keep maintaining regularly for the system to have a proper life. and to live as much as possible, which, just to remind you, the life expectancy of the PV panels is around 20-25 years. Lithium batteries is 10 years. So we want to ensure that the operation and maintenance is really thought from the beginning, is really taken care of from the beginning in order to do so, right? And this includes training to the users and on the regular operation. We also see that very important as having some sort of way to see the data and to monitor the solar installation remotely, sort of web server that all the manufacturers provide now for free, or almost free. Then preventive maintenance contract, hopefully with the installer, so they come 3, 4, 5 years times per the year to do a regular maintenance, or do a preventive maintenance of the system, and to ensure that you have access to all the spare parts and replacements within the country, or at least within the region. So it's a bit the summary of the key aspects that we identified here in MSF towards having a successful solar energy installation. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much, Iñaki, for the presentation. And so we can see actually that at MSF Brussels, you have expertise in-house. You really develop such a solar energy expertise really in-house, and deploying it in the field yourself, I guess also with partners, but really having this expertise in-house.
Yes. We have in HQ where we work. We have a team. I am part of a team of 5 people, all of them with experience with solar energy, and then in the field we have several people that either they have physical experience with solar installations in the countries where we work. We try to enroll them as much as possible in trainings to have knowledge of solar energy installations. We also, solar energy is a very important part.
Iñaki? Hello, Iñaki, can you hear us?
Yes. Sorry,
okay.
I thought I was lost for a second, the internet.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation. And now we will go to Tania Chauvin from Electricians Without Borders. Tania, the floor is yours.
Hi, let me just share my screen and I'll be okay, I hope you can see my presentation.
Not yet.
Oh, just a second. And now, is it okay?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect.
All good.
So hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm Tania Chauvin. I'm a project officer at Electriciens Sans Frontières. Because we're using English today, I'll just say Electricians Without Borders from now on. So we wanted to share our experience in the use of solar energy and international aid. Just to go back to who we are. So we're a French-based NGO with actions in about 40 countries throughout the world. We were founded in 1986, so we have more than 35 years of experience in energy access projects, mainly in rural off-grid areas of the world. More than 95% of our projects are based on renewable energy and mainly solar, as we'll see in the rest of the presentation. About half of our projects include access to water through renewable energy with solar water pumping. And so as Iñaki said, I think solar energy is not a goal in itself. It's for us as an NGO, it's a tool that is used to improve living conditions. So of course, health, as we're going to talk about today, but also education, economic development, training, et cetera, et cetera. Just a quick reminder, I thought it was interesting to remind everyone that energy for a long time was not considered as a core principle in the field of international development, and it gradually took more importance up to the 7th SDG that is dedicated to energy. And we've seen a growing interest of the international community and of other non-specialized actors in the use of energy, and we're glad that it's been taking place. But we also think that for it to function well, there needs to be a number of facts that are understood. Just to come back on what we do, we've received a number of prizes in recent years that also show a growing interest for energy projects. So for example, we installed solar PV kits on health centers in Dominica to improve resilience after Hurricane Maria. And we received an award from the UN in 2020. We received a prize for a project that we implemented in Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh with the installation of solar streetlights, solar home systems, and the training, especially of refugees and host populations. And in 2022, so last year, we received a prize during COP27 for a project that target access to electricity, water, and sanitation for rural areas in Togo. So that's a variety of actions. I think maybe just to show what might differentiate us from other NGOs is that we are composed of 1,200 volunteers that are at the core of the actions. And basically, a lot of them are professionals from the energy sector and technically trained. So that's an important part of our action. They're supported by a headquarters staff, which I'm part of, but they are the ones that will conduct the feasibility studies, that will do all the work on our project. And just another part of our action is that we intervene in emergency settings. So to bring back power and water access to people in need. So you'll see we intervene in most recent emergencies, both with our own actions and in support of other actors on the field, which is how we entered into a lot of partnerships with other aid actors to which we can provide our expertise and support in their energy projects and water, of course. So you see with the French Red Cross, Solidarité, a number of other actors. Just to specify those, we can provide, and we do provide, a variety of support, which goes from the audit, the diagnosis of the existing electrical installations, through on-site missions, which can go together with a lot of recommendations for safety, for electrical hazards, fires, the implementation, compliance, or implementation work. We also can help the qualification of local suppliers and installers, and the entire process of PV project implementation. So from needs analysis, scoping energy needs, drafting technical specifications, follow-up, and training actions. Just to give you guys an overview, in the last 5 years, we did a number of missions for MSF Switzerland, with whom we have a partnership agreements since right after the earthquake in Haiti, one of our longest standing expertise partnership agreements. Also with the French Red Cross, which we entered in relation after the typhoon in the Philippines, and also Première Urgence, Alima recently, and on a number of locations throughout the world. So we were talking about different needs, and I think it's important to see that there's needs for field offices and guest houses for a number of international aid actors. But the needs might be very different to project activities such as health centers, dispensaries, or hospitals. The loads are very different. The equipment that needs to be connected is very different. And so the solutions that have to be devised can vary greatly. It also can depend a lot on the location. So a project in the capital city or for a large hospital might interest a lot of high quality companies locally, but a project for a small dispensary, for example, in an isolated rural areas is going to be a lot harder to find local electricians that are trained and that are going to be available to go on location. So identifying the necessary resources for those different settings is very important. We can also provide help for other project activities, so water pumping, public lighting and refugee camps, and training for maintenance. Mainly what I wanted to focus on, I think, in terms of our recommendations is that, as Iñaki said, I think it is important to know why you're going to solar. And so what we often say to NGOs that contact us is to beware of the idea that solar is free, for example, or that it's going to be cost saving, which it might be, of course, in terms of fuel costs, for example. But having high quality equipment is a cost, but that's the thing that's going to provide more longevity. And that's going to be robust, especially if you're in harsh climate or in higher temperature, for example. So you need high quality batteries to make sure that they last more than 5 years. And what we prioritize is needs analysis beforehand, because what we often see during the missions is that a lot of the equipment that is on hand tends to overconsume. It can be old equipment or it has high energy needs. So a first point is going to see which equipment you want to connect. And if you have the means to replace equipment, to buy updated, more energy efficient material or equipment. So that's a very important points of your needs analysis in order to adequately size the PV installation. Because what is going to impact your PV installation is the need for storage batteries, which is a huge cost. For example, if you're thinking about a hospital, you could go full solar, but it's going to be a need for an important storage of batteries. So that's going to be a huge cost, and it has emissions cost as well, even though it's, of course, going to be better than fuel. Maybe the two final points that we want to go is, so maintenance, we think that it's often not thought out in advance, because with solar, you have a big upfront cost. Then you have a few years with practically no cost except for maintenance. But for example, for the batteries, in 10 years, you're going to need to put up a high price again. And this notion is often not well integrated into the financing of projects. So capital costs are included, but maintenance and renewal costs are not. And that's something that we advocate for in the international community, for it to be financed by donor, to be taken into account, because in a lot of cases, it's not planned ahead. And so when the installation stops working after 10 years, the health center, for example, does not have the budget to finance its renewal, and the PV installation stops working. So it reduces the credibility of PV installation. And finally, I think what's really important is the transfer of skills and know-how to make sure that locally you have the capacities to analyze the system, to do basic maintenance, and for secondhand, more important maintenance, to hire a local company that is qualified. Thank you. Don't hesitate if you have any questions. I can go into more detail.
Thank you very much, Tanya. So basically, if some aid organizations here, health organizations or aid organizations here in the room wish to contact you and maybe to partner with you to develop to deploy some solar energy in the field, you will be really interested in that, yes?
Absolutely, that's something that we're used to do and that we are happy to help other NGOs with as much as needed. Okay, and in your organization, it's both English and French, right? For those who only speak French in the field? Yeah, well, we're mostly French volunteer experts, but we have a number that also speak English. Okay, right. Thank you very much, Tanya. Well, last speaker here, Mark Gibson from UNITAR. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen and you can hear me okay. Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for inviting me to join today and participating. I'm going to talk to you about the Decarbonising Humanitarian Energy Multi-Partner Trust Fund. You will see DHE MPTF as acronyms throughout this sort of presentation. So just bear with us as you sort of get used to these acronyms. As introduced earlier, I'm the operational lead of the Global Platform for Action for Energy in Displacement Settings. And essentially, we're trying to support the delivery of SDG 7 in humanitarian operations and activities, which includes solarization as part of that down. So if I... So quickly, just going to go through the decarbonising response. Some numbers already presented earlier. We'll talk about the multi-partner trust fund and then go into some delivery models. I'm talking to the converted. As you were seeing at the beginning, there's approximately 11,400 diesel generators amongst the sort of 6 UN agencies mentioned there and ICRC. That could actually be almost 25,000 when we include other UN agencies, including peacekeeping operations. So we're talking about a lot of diesel generators that need to be solarized. The sort of modeling that we've done with Monte Carlo assessments suggests that we're spending, or these 6 entities are spending approximately $110 million a year on fuel, and that's contributing about 200,000 tons of CO2 per year. And the modelling is also provides the good side. We feel that we can reduce CO2 by about 65%, and that would reduce fuel spending by around 70 million. That would allow us around a sort of return on investment of 3.5 years. So what this is trying to say is, we talk to colleagues, we're there for the ethical reasons around climate action, but we always run into colleagues about the cost. Well, the numbers actually speak for themselves as we go. I mean, we do that. So What is the goal and objective of the Decarbonising Multi-Partner Trust Fund? Well, really, it's to support a countrywide adoption of energy efficiency measures and sustainable energy solutions in fragile contexts. And that will be facilitated by a centralised clean energy service. And I'll come on to that in a little bit. The actual objectives are to reduce energy consumption and the associated carbon and financial costs. But what we're also looking at is if we are looking at a country-wide approach, we can actually bundle projects together so we can get economies of scale when we go out to procurement. But also if we bundle together, it can actually unlock some financial mechanisms. For instance, the environmental attributes associated to the solar solutions for carbon credits. Many of the systems in humanitarian operations are too small, therefore the cost associated to administering carbon credits is too expensive, and there's, the money get back is less than the cost put in. But what happens if we do that as a collective? So that's something that we'll be looking into. And also we're trying to simplify the entry point for the commercial sector. At this moment in time, it tends to be single partners going out for single sites or 2 or 3 sites. And it's complex for the commercial sector to really identify which opportunities are coming from the humanitarian partners and where. So we're doing a countrywide support, and we're looking at bundling together, and makes it far easier. And also, I'll touch upon this a little bit later in the presentation, is if we're bringing private sector to develop solar solutions in humanitarian sectors, what opportunities can we use in their presence there to actually extend their electricity provision to the displacement setting itself? And then finally, is actually to create some evidence-based material to promote low carbon operations. We're still hearing that there's not enough information to show or to really drive investment into alternative energy solutions here. So what we would be doing is collecting all this information together to actually hopefully present a very positive picture. So who is delivering it? This essentially is the sort of clean energy service, the centralized clean energy service. There'll be ourselves, the GPA coordination unit at UNITAR, providing the overall program coordination, and we'll also be doing the sort of research piece around using the data to promote this work even more. Many of you may be aware of the green energy team at UNDP in Copenhagen. They essentially have a 7 steps process where they do energy assessments, provide the business case for their solutions, and actually support it through the procurement process, installation, and operation maintenance. So it's really providing our development colleagues with some humanitarian background for the work. And then we'll be using NORCAP as a part of NRC, their Green Shift team, to actually provide additional capacity in countries. As our own work with UNDP has shown that to make it really work well, we need someone on the ground, technical expert, that can actually coordinate this as we go through. So who is this aimed at, this service? Well, it's actually aimed at anyone who's operating a diesel generator who is supporting the humanitarian response in a DHE target country. And I'll come on to that in a little second. So it doesn't matter if the generator is connected to a head office in the capital city, field office, deep field, warehouse or guest house, water pumping station, or school health centre, all will be considered for that. So we've actually been provided seed funding for the next 3 years from the German Federal Foreign Office to around about $22 million US. The initial focus is on 5 countries in the Sahel. We're actually in the inception phase for the first 6 months of 2023, is bringing the partners together and developing the work plan. We will be targeting Nigeria and Niger as the sort of first initial countries, and there will be another 3 that will be determined later this year. And just as a heads up, I'd be surprised if Chad wasn't one of those. And because it's a multi-partner trust fund, what we'll be actually looking for is additional funding to take the program global, so external to the Sahel, and over the year program. And this is really how we see the MTF working as itself. There would be a NORCAP deployee in the country that would undertake a countrywide appraisal. So working with all the humanitarian partners in Niger or Nigeria, for instance, identifying where the diesel generators are, their size, their capacity, whatever information we have, and plotting those on some sort of geographic system so that we can see where they are located. And also talking to the government agencies, the partners themselves, to understand what the energy situation is in the country, what potential business models we can use to go forward with that. And then from that countrywide appraisal, we will be developing a country work plan. And that work plan essentially would potentially sort of look at the geospatial conglomeration of where these diesel generators are, and we would move around those generators to actually start getting some geospatial results around there, and that would support the pooling. And the idea of this sort of undertaking this countrywide appraisal is, at the moment, we see a lot of partners just flying in their specialists and then flying them out. They might be focused on one or two of their operations, not the whole country. What we're seeing is, one agency or one NGO is developing its own methodology. Someone else is reinventing the wheel across the road. And what we're trying to say is bringing all the pieces of the jigsaw together and actually use what's already there and well developed. So once we have that country plan in place, there will be a facility assessment. So we'll be installing energy monitoring devices in the facilities to get some sort of live data, understanding the electrical needs associated to that. And that energy monitoring device will remain in place so that once we do some interventions, we can actually monitor and keep track of fuel savings, energy savings, and sort of CO2 reduction targets, so that we can actually report off a computer-based dashboard at a press of a button. The facility assessment will also include a site visit, looking to see what space is available in the car parks, in the ceilings, on the sort of roofs, for these facilities, and actually going through a sort of questionnaire to understand what is there, what the actual energy need is. All that information that would then be sent to the UNDP Green Energy team in Copenhagen, where they would use that information to design a potential system and the business case. So the business case would say things like, you need is this, we can provide a renewable energy component associated to this amount, it would cost you this, it would save you this. So you can actually see all the big numbers around the sort of decision-making process of whether to proceed or not with your sort of solar or solar hybrid solution. And what we're bringing into this is a sort of strong focus on energy efficiency. This has already been mentioned in the other presentations. At the moment, we've seen many of our partners just looking at the energy needs that they have at this moment and not looking at the opportunity to actually reduce that need. So we'll be focused on lighting and air conditioning units as an option to reduce energy demand, because these would have sort of some of the significant impacts. We've been working with WFP, who've got a really strong energy efficient component into their program. And they're showing data where they're buying the most efficient and expensive air conditioning units. And when they install those on a diesel-based system, they're getting return on investments of less than 12 months. So there's a huge opportunity to actually drive down energy efficiency. And with a project that we've worked with WFP on in Djibouti, is that the energy demand was reduced by, I think, something like 45%, 50%, just by switching the old air conditioners to more efficient systems. So again, as we mentioned, we'd be looking at sort of bundling those opportunities together and going through procurement to drive down costs, but also allows us to put some sustainable procurement into there. So looking at the removal of the old ones to not only treat the e-waste, but also reduce releases of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere by pore removal, and sort of driving that process forward. And then when we actually switch to the business case for the solar solution. It could be solar. We assume it's more likely to be solar hybrid, so the diesel generator would remain because of the emergency backup. And as mentioned by previous presenters, the cost of battery. That's not to say that battery solutions won't be included as part of this. There's essentially two business models that we can go down. Basically, a grant-based model where the partner itself goes out, finds the money, and buys the system and installs that, or a third-party model, sort of like a power purchase agreement or lease agreement. Don't worry about this. I'm got a couple of slides on this later to talk about these opportunities. And again, it's looking at trying to bundle these projects together to actually reduce costs and provide a broader opportunity to this space. Because the work that we've been doing, we had a facility, UNHCR in Djibouti. It's located hundreds of kilometers away from the main city, Djiboutiville, and trying to get anyone of interest to quote for the work, to actually bid for the work and actually install the system has been really, really challenging because of its remote location and small size. So again, by offering bundled solutions, not only are we reducing the price, we're actually increasing the opportunities for people. So we hope to get better bids in to support those processes. And then at the end of it, we've obviously got the program monitoring and evaluation. I've put that there because that's not just about reporting on the multi-partner trust fund and its performance, but what we're actually trying to do is put in a sort of digital dashboard, so anyone who have accessed this service and have gone down this route can actually log into it, and through the energy monitoring device that was stored in the beginning can actually see the energy demands and keep track, so their own reporting on CO2 and sort of savings can be continuously monitored and reported through ease. So essentially, that is the multi-partner trust fund. And as you've seen, we've talked about a grant-based model, and we talked about a power purchase agreement, lease agreement model. But also, if we talked about the presence of the private sector and how we can leverage their presence into displacement settings. So I'm just going to talk you through those very quickly. So the existing model is the sort of grant-based, which was mentioned only, was where we own, operate, and maintain the system. So essentially, we get a grant from the donor, and we buy the solution, and essentially we have free electricity for a while. As mentioned, it's not quite free because if we've got batteries, we need to replace that, and there's also we need to be aware of the operations and maintenance costs of these solutions. I would say from our partners, there's a lot of bitter tastes in the mouth associated to the grant-based model, where procurement is used to drive down to the lowest cost, which may mean that the quality of the systems are not great, and operation and maintenance is not considered. So there's no money in the pot to replace spare parts. There may not even be anyone with the technical skills to fix the system or understand it when the system's down, what is happening. So where there is a grant-based model, we always recommend to our partners that when they go out to tender, there's at least a 3-year operation and maintenance schedule attached to the procurement process, so that we know for the first 3 years it's going to be looked after properly, and that can be obviously renewed as the process goes on. The issue with this model is that it requires a lot of upfront investment, and donors are not necessarily keen to provide the sums of money needed for this, because they see that the UN and NGOs should be managing their money more efficiently. So if there is a lower cost option, then that should be pursued without additional funds. But as I say, there can be a considerable upfront cost. So that leads us to this new model, this energy as a service, where no upfront cost is necessarily required for the system. There are upfront costs required for the development of the business case, but as I said, we're providing that through the centralized clean energy solution. So how does this actually work? Well, the actual system is bought by the energy service company with private finance, and the private finance is, and they will operate and maintain that system as part of the contract. but it's the long-term agreement between the off-taker and the energy service company that allows the electricity service company to go to the private sector and get funding. So we see power purchase agreements or lease agreements for around 10, 15 years. And there's a monthly payment that's attached to that. So once we have that sort of agreement in place, the energy service company can take it to the banks and say, right, I've got a 10-year contract with, say, UNHCR for this project. Can you lend me some money to buy the install and set the system up? Which sounds great. The only problem we have with this model at the moment is the UN, in all its long-term agreements, has a termination clause of 30 days. So that reduces a 10-year contract to about 30 days, and it's impossible then for an energy service company to go out to market and get private finance. So that's why we're seeing little use of this service in humanitarian settings or with the UN at this moment in time. And where we have seen it, I think there's 1 or 2 cases that are coming along at this moment in time, but the cost of electricity is 3 times of what we expect to cover that sort of investment risk. But on this, we do have funding from a third party to develop a de-risking model, and essentially would look at some sort of 12-month liquidity function. So should the UN enact its termination clause, the energy service company would still receive 12 months of payments, and that would allow the 2 partners to agree what happens with the solar solution. So for instance, if the UN is moving out the building and a new tenant is coming in, can that new tenant take on that agreement? If the UN is moving, can the system be actually taken across, reinstalled to the new place? Or if there's no solutions, can it be sold? And then what's the residual loss associated to that? And after 12 months, if there's no sort of solution available, then the sort of guarantee mechanism comes in, and then this sort of debt finance that's been requested would be paid. And by doing this, what we'd actually hope to see is more energy services companies come to this space. So we have increased competition, we're reducing the costs associated to this process. And this really is just a sort of summary of the 2 systems as we're going through. So we have the sort of procuring as a system in the middle column, and then as you look at the one on the right is the procuring of the system. Essentially, you have to fund this yourself, doing the sort of upfront work going through. The capital investment comes for the system from a grant, is from the donor. From the procuring system, it's private finance. The ownership of the system remains with the humanitarian actor if it's bought with a grant, but the actual system through the procuring of the system remains with the energy service company, although after a number of years, it actually can be transferred. So it could be like a lease to own, and that lease to own could actually transfer to the local community. So we can actually have community run energy systems as we go forward. The procuring of the system, as I mentioned, the main problem with that is actually spare parts and the need to budget replacement. Whereas in the sort of procuring of the service, this is all costed into your monthly fee. So you don't actually have to worry about it. It's like you and I just paying our monthly electricity bill that not only pays for the electricity, but all the service that is goes with that. And it talks about the need for a de-risking mechanism there. And then, as I say, this also allows us to go into the communities. And then hopefully the next slide, this one shows how we do it. So if we look at a leasing agreement, the power purchase agreement, as I mentioned, that there is an energy service company that has secured private finance through an energy agreement with human actor and is supplying electricity to the actor on a monthly fee. This is the third-party model that we have. Can we bring in some blended finance? Can we get some additional donor money to actually extend the size of that system that's been installed with the actor, and by doing so, throw a cable across the fence to the sort of community and actually have subsidized energy going to power small businesses, for instance? I don't think this solution will ever really work as to providing household access, just because of the size of the numbers, and mini grids are not necessarily the cheapest solutions for that sort of solution. But by having this model, what we can actually do is provide electricity to communities at a lower cost, because the anchor client, in this instance, the UN, is already paying for the maintenance costs and the bulk of the installation and servicing of that. So we can extend it outside. Right, that was a very quick summary of not only the Multi-Partner Trust Fund, but the different delivery models. And this is essentially sort of 3 to 4 years work of the sort of UNITAR GPA team. So apologies if I've skipped important information or raced through it too quickly, but we are now open for questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. There were a lot of information, and I'm sure people here, attendees, if they wish to come back to the presentation later to have a look at the details and all the different pieces of information, it will be available on our website. And I'm sure, Mark, you are happy to have any contact also with them. Just one follow-up question for you, because it wasn't clear for me, so maybe also for some people in the room. Regarding the fund that you mentioned, could an organization from the aid sector benefit from the fund on one way or the other? And if yes, what's the process? Do they have to apply? Can they contact you? What's the deadline? Can you develop a little bit?
Yeah, so essentially the fund is set up that sort of provides or supports the clean energy, as the centralized clean energy service. So it's paying for, I would say, technical assistance programs for anyone that has a sort of diesel generator in these humanitarian settings. So when we go into, for instance, Niger or Nigeria, you have a diesel-based solution there that you're considering swapping to some sort of solarization, or would like to understand what the opportunity is, then do reach out to us directly. Or we are sort of main partners to understand who their sort of implementing partners are in the country, to understand their needs and where they are. So best to reach out to us and get on that system so that we can actually do the business case for you. Now, in terms of accessing funds, there will be funds available for a grant from the fund to support energy efficiency measures, because, as I say, this isn't actually being done by many of our partners. So having a grant-based solution there of around about probably 50% of the cost will help drive that solution and embed it into the sort of energy transition process. Unfortunately, there's no funding available at this moment for the solar or solar hybrid solution. That would still need to be sourced, but the reason that there is no fund there is that we're hoping that we can go down this third-party model and really push this, because, you know, humanitarian organizations should not be energy producers, right? We should be focused on the humanitarian response and let someone else deliver the energy, the electricity for needs. Now, if there is an opportunity for a partner to support this. For instance, we are talking to MSF in Switzerland, to the likes of ICRC, about energy efficiency and the behavioral change stuff. And there may be an opportunity for their training program to come across to this. And then if we need to pay for trainers and source material, then that can come out of the fund, and they would just apply to the fund and take the money from there. So there is that opportunity as well to support the process.
Okay, thank you very much. So there are some opportunities. People should reach out to you to look into them. And an important message is that first we need to look at energy efficiency measures everywhere, and then to have another sources of energy. We won't have a solution just looking at an alternative sources of energy. We need to reduce also to be more efficient in what we do. Okay, thank you very much. So now we will open the floor for any question you may have. So please go ahead with your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand as well to our three speakers here. Or if you have any experience to share. Maybe I see different organizations here. So if you also want to share an experience, please go ahead. We really have 30 minutes here to have any kind of questions to our speakers. So do not hesitate. Before the questions come, maybe one question. You mentioned a little bit about the waste. How do you address waste management issues in your solar energy projects? Like in terms of batteries and panels, how do you address this issue?
Yeah, if I may. So obviously what we're trying to do here is bring in sort of electronic goods into areas that are quite remote. And therefore there's a concern that we're actually increasing electronic waste as the systems reach their useful end of life. So the best way to sort of minimize this is to look at sustainable procurement and drive quality into the procurement. So unfortunately, we just need to pay a little bit more upfront, make sure that we get quality product that's in, make sure they are the operation and maintenance contracts in place so that they're being serviced and well maintained, and looking at how to extend the life of important component parts such as batteries and so forth. So really trying to prolong the life as much as possible. And then we just sort of waste management hierarchy. What are the opportunities to repair, recycle, reuse, and sort of dispose of in the end. And there is, I'll put a link in the chat. There, the GPA and NORCAP have produced a sort of e-waste report that sort of looks at this concern and how we can work that solution forward, because it's not up to humanitarian organizations to set up e-waste solutions in a lot of countries that we are working in, but we need to be aware of it, and we need to be receptive to their solutions. And I'd also like to hand over to Tanya, my colleague from Electricians Without Borders, because we are working in a project in Bangladesh on this. So over to you, Tanya.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Yes, that is a big issue, and that is an issue that we notice during our interventions in camp settings, which are supposed to be temporary, but in a lot of cases become very long-term operations. And so we noticed the question of the quality of the equipment, as Mark said. So in procurement is a big issue because, as was said, I think, by Iñaki and Mark, for international aid operations, you're going to have to find the most cost-effective solution in many tenders, which often is not the highest quality equipment that can have longer life cycles and can be opened and repaired, for example. I think the second point is a question of having hubs, and that's what we're trying to implement with UNITAR in refugee camps, is to have kind of upcycling, recycling, safety handling of all the equipment, all of the electronical equipment. So it can be SNH, it can be solar lamps, all kind of solar products, to have hubs where they can be deposited, where people that are trained can look to repair them if possible, and if not possible, at the end, at least to ensure that it doesn't pollute or injure anyone. And there's an issue of volume, because as Mark said, in a lot of dispersed settings, it's going to be very costly to come and pick up the equipment. That's why often it's just left out. So if all NGOs or camp organizations collectively act to collect and send out for recycling their electronic equipment, we could try to reach a volume that would work. Otherwise, it's going to be a huge cost for organization, which is not very viable in the sector. So we're trying to implement it in Cox's Bazar first, but the idea is, if it works, to try to implement those little hubs in any displacement or camp setting.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here from Nicola on the chat, to Mark. You told about carbon credits and the opportunity to use it to finance on field projects. What about the threshold that allows this financing tool be interesting enough for a single actor? Does this financing tool enter innovative financing model like energy as a service? Very specific question to you, Mark.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you, Nicholas. Yeah, so at this moment in time, most of our systems, as you say, with the sort of approach is very piecemeal. So a lot of our partners are doing, you know, one here, one there. I would say the system size are probably somewhere between 25 kilowatt peak and maybe 500 kilowatt peak, but the majority are probably less than 100 kilowatt peak. So when we actually look at the opportunity for carbon credits, the actual administrative cost of setting that up for such a small system is not worth it. You know, it'll cost you more to set it up than the actual carbon credits that you'll generate. So I think in general, the cost of where it switches is a system of around about, if I remember rightly, please don't quote me on this, but there is a report coming out from us shortly between sort of half a megawatt and 1 megawatt. It starts to become interesting. So how do we group those together? So again, if we do this countrywide assessment and we actually pull together, you know, 60, 70 different systems, what does that look like in terms of generation? Now, as a single actor is probably, my guess is probably still going to struggle with this because of the number of diesel generators that you have. So by bundling the projects, what we are going to explore through some research, we've got some data in Nigeria, is if we all our renewable credits into a pot, what would that look like? And that pot could then be used to go back to the operation and maintenance of the systems they service, or to get extra value in the carbon credits is actually, could that be a sort of community program? Can that go to actually fund some of these extensions to local communities? And if we do that, we're likely to get an increase in our sort of CO2 cost per ton as we sell that on. So all these things are in review. But we've also been speaking to, I don't know if anyone knows Energy Peace Partners. They have something like a PREX. And they at the moment are bundling, I think it's 40, 25 kilowatt peak systems together and exploring what this might look like on the market. So we're not the only ones that are suggesting this, which is great to hear. But it's something that we are looking at. So it's a very long way of saying, we don't know yet, but that's the great thing of this program, is that we will have access to this data to actually put it to the marketplace and start drawing this down on this. Okay. But as I say, I think as single entities, it's very unlikely that you would be able to generate the carbon credits on your own, I would say.
Thank you, Mark. Again, if you have any questions for our speakers, it's the time. You can raise your hand or write in the chat. One question for you three, MSF, ESF, and UNITAR, very operational question. Do you have at MSF, ESF, UNITAR lists of local or regional energy service companies that can really help in installing and maintaining the systems? Is it something that you already have? You know the people, you know the companies, and you will be able to share some names, or is it not yet? It's not here yet.
Maybe I can start for this one. So to answer that question, I think it's really important to know the right suppliers. Of course, it's going to be a big part of finding the right PV solution, the right expertise. Through our history, of course, we have developed, and through our own project, a number of experience and feedback from working with local companies, because we always rely on local companies. We don't do the work ourselves, or as little as possible, because we want to structure the local private sector in the energy sector. But it's hard, even internally, to have kind of like a defined list. It can change so fast. It can vary from one project to another. It can depend on the relationship that has been developed, on the size of the project and the workers that are affected to it. That's why I was specifying during my presentation a big difference in interests by local companies depending on the size of your project, or whether it's going to be in a remote location or in the capital city. So it's going to be very diverse. And even for questions of like reputations and confidentiality, it's very tricky to share those lists. So in our expertise towards other NGOs, and when we go in the country, we can put them in contact with electricians that we've known for years. But we can't provide a set list.
But you do have a lot of contacts in the field that you can, and you could really help if necessary.
Of course.
Yeah, if I might jump in, from a UN perspective, it's very difficult for us to have a close working relation with the private sector and then going out to procurement. But thankfully at UNITAR, because we're not buying anything ourselves directly, we can have those sort of discussions and stuff. But as Danny has said, is that we don't want to be seen to be endorsing anyone. So we would suggest reach out to GODA, reach out to ARE, to see who are their members in a particular country to reach out to as that approach. And depending where we are, for instance, working in Nigeria, there's some very good local companies, and may not necessarily be the need for any sort of international organizations international actors to be part of that. But just to let people be aware, with the approach that UNDP uses for new markets, is that they have long-term agreements with a number of sort of solar solution providers. And as part of that process, they have to reach out to have a local partner. So there is this inbuilt local capacity side of things, because we want people to be there. We want people to be, learning from the work that's being done in this space and actually pushing the development of these solutions in the country where they may not already exist.
Okay, thank you. Iñaki, would you want to add anything on really add any recommendation you may have? Because I guess in our attendees in the organizations here, some of them are really thinking into developing an internal expertise themselves. Let's say, the organizations that have the funds to do that are thinking about it. So would you have any recommendation for them in terms of, I don't know, process or what really matters, what's important?
Yeah, well, I guess it would be the same development process that you have for any type of staff, right? As in, you have to identify and to have them from the very beginning, have them develop a proper job description with a long-term contract, the regular aspects for this type of HR development, right? Which unfortunately we don't usually find in the field, because most of the cases they are working on demand, meaning that if they need an electrician for a particular project, they hire him, but that's the end. No, so you will need to have somebody on a permanent basis as part of your staff, which, at least in our case in MSF, it really pays off, and it's really pertinent, because most of our missions and projects, we have maybe 2-3 projects in one single country, and considering that plus the structures in the capital, etc., it really pays off having these electricians on the permanent payroll, right? And then in terms of technical expertise, there are plenty of very high quality trainings online nowadays for the several universities, right, that they do online at their own pace. I'm thinking about Spanish, Australian, French universities, Netherlands-based universities that we use, and some others. And then there's also a lot of, let's say, material and trainings developed by a private sector. No, we can drop some names, but specifically in the countries where we work, I'm thinking actors such as Victron, for example, or SMA in Fronius, that they have very good webinars and training material that you can access online, and also they do face-to-face trainings, and they are very willing to participate in any type of trainings that we do in face-to-face, which also helps.
Okay, thank you. I saw Pascal raising his hand. Do you have a question, Pascal?
Yes, I want to come back a little bit on this idea of private company. It's a little bit to have a wrap up. What will be the main duty for an energy service company in the context on a power purchase agreement in the main line, maybe for Tanya or for Mark?
Sorry, Pascal, if I understand your question correctly, is yes. What is the role of the energy service company?
Right, the different duties of energy service company in the frame of a power purchase agreement.
Yeah, no, thanks, Pascal. So the energy service company would own, operate, and maintain the system. So although the system would be installed on your premises or rented to premises, then we need to speak to the landlord. So they could be on the roof, they could be on the car park, they could be on sort of, waste ground sort of thing. But it really would be the energy service company just selling you electricity. So you'd be paying that monthly. You don't have to worry about anything else because that company, as I say, would own it, operate it, pay for it, maintain it for you. Whereas conversely, if you own it, you then need to operate, maintain it, and do it yourself. So there's all the additional side of things that you need then someone that can do simple maintenance maybe or diagnostics. I mean, there is these online systems where the diagnostics can be done remotely, but you still need someone there to go and repair it. You need to make financial provisions for maintaining it and placing spare parts, especially batteries. Batteries can be hugely expensive, and if, as Daniel mentioned, the life is reduced from sort of 8 years to 5 years because of poor installation or exposure to heat and stuff. You need that money, and sometimes it's not available with humanitarian organisation. The system shuts down or doesn't deliver what you're expecting. And unfortunately, I've seen this in my own sort of recent past. In sort of Central Africa, where the system was installed by, I think, money from Oxfam, designed in a neighbouring country with an expert from a neighbouring country. Within 3 months, it stopped working. There was no one in that country that was able to understand what the problem was, what it needed to do. So they had to fly the expert back in. He then had to do the assessment, understand what there was, worked out there was a broken part. There was no money in the budget for that. So the system was down, I think, for about 9 or 10 months through this process. And this isn't, unfortunately, a rare story. This appears to be the common story. And where there is very poor access to experts, we then end up with a lot of broken systems in the field and a lot of bad taste in the mouth. And it actually sort of prohibits people moving forward with this, because the story will be, we did this, it didn't work. So we really need to sort of move across and let someone else do the electricity piece, and let's concentrate on the humanitarian piece.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. Maybe maybe we can summarize the key sustainability factors for a solar system. Maybe if we have 3, 4, 5 main points to ensure the sustainability of the system, because for sure it is a problem. We can see solar system somewhere in Central Africa, it's not working. If we can, if we have 3, 4 key factors for the sustainability for a long-lasting system, for you, Tanya, as well, or Iñaki,
Sure.
So key success factors. Thank you.
Sure, and I think it'll complement Mark's intervention as well. I think 3 things that need to be taken into account to avoid like a lot of failures is the proper sizing beforehand. So knowing which energy needs you want to switch to solar energy, because for example, for medical equipment, in case there can't be like a break of access to energy, or for large loads, you might have to think of like hybrid or have a backup generator, even though that's not very politically correct now. But we have to be pragmatic and know what you can switch to solar and what you can't. And if your equipment is energy efficient enough, and if it's not, to have a provision line to replace the equipment before you switch the power production. So I think that's very important. And having, if you can't internalize the sizing part, to have a mission on site by the proper electricians, because there's a big difference, especially in remote, underserved areas, between like the theoretical location and facility and its real life situation. So for me, beforehand, that would be the most important. Then high quality material with higher longevity, but that also means in many cases a higher upfront cost. So you need to plan for that in advance. And then solar might not be as like cost reduction as it can be seen, but you have to do it for the environment, but maybe not prioritize the idea of fuel savings or money saving. And the last part I would say is training locally for basic maintenance, but referring to a locally available energy supplier or company to provide like more important maintenance. And funding that, as Mark said, it's often the case that capital funds were provided to buy the equipment, but no line was provided for the maintenance and for its renewal in case of breakdown. So I think for donors, for the international aid community, that is the most important point of advocacy that we could make.
Iñaki, do you want to add anything on these success factors?
Yeah, no, I think basically, like what Tanya said, no, the success factors, I mean, from the design phase, it's really important to pay attention to that. We don't usually do it. And that's where most of the problems come from, right? And the systems are not properly sized. And then you have to define that exactly which type of facility and what are your end goal. It's very different if you are solarizing a small health center with a couple of kilowatt peak from a hospital where you have a 250 kVA generator, very different needs. But yeah, basically to define your needs from the beginning, whatever the case, and then everything that goes with it, training, maintenance, and everything that Tanya just mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I had a follow-up question on what you just said, Tanya, about the backup systems. Just to clarify, maybe for our attendees, is it possible to do 100% solar on your projects? Is it something realistic? And what is, you mentioned the risk there. So can you comment maybe a little bit on that, MSF, ESF? And also what would be the typical share of solar energy in your projects in the field?
Yes, thank you for that question, Marie-Flore. I think it's important. I saw Inyaki's reaction, which I think is similar as mine. I think that's something that can be very promising for a lot of NGOs right now or actors to completely solarize their operation. And while it might seem like the best practice environmentally, for example, it's often not realistic, and we want to be very clear on that point, especially for, as Iñaki said, it depends on the size of your facility and your equipment. So, for example, for a small health center in a rural area with basic equipment and mostly lighting, connecting a few computers, yes, absolutely. A PV installation is going to be okay. But if you're looking at a center, for example, with an operation room with, I don't know, oxygen access, of equipment or refrigerators that can't, shut down because it's going to impact the quality of the medication. Any case where they can't be a powered outage, you could solarize everything, but you would need a huge amount of storage batteries. That would be both an insane cost, honestly, and a huge issue of maintenance. And even like it's not fuel emissions during its process, but the issue of waste, as we talked about, and the production of batteries, whether they're lead or lithium, has an environmental impact. So it might not even be the best environmental idea. So it really depends on what you want to solarize. But I think we need to be pragmatic and see that solar can be a huge provider, but hybrid solutions connected to the grid, for example, in cases where you have a grid, or to a small backup power generator for life-saving equipment might be the best option.
I guess, Iñaki, you are on the same lines.
Yes, on the same line. I mean, basically it comes to what I was trying to say at the beginning, depends on exactly what do you want to achieve with solar energy, right? If you are talking about, for example, in MSF, these small health centers in remote areas where they don't have any access to fuel, they don't have any generator and so on, and you just want an energy source to light a couple of light bulbs and with basically a small energy consumption, then yes, obviously the solution is to go with 100% of grid solar energy setup, and that really works. And we do that often, and as actually a very good solution. And we even have hospitals in Congo, in these places where very difficult fuel access to fuel, where we run 100% on solar, and we even run operational theaters and everything, 100% on solar. There's no problem. From a technical point of view, it works. Now, when you reach a certain size, then it's not practical anymore, because the size of your installation, the batteries, the PV panels, the everything becomes such a massive installation that it's not really useful. And it's not practical at all, no? And then when you speak with the people in charge of, they were initially suggesting to have this set up, and you ask them, okay, but what is it that you want with this, no? And they say, well, actually, we only need to reduce a bit our energy consumption and to have the most efficient system. So when we work with them and we try to find a common solution, we usually come up with a solution that involves a solar penetration, so saving the energy field savings on around, let's say, between 40 and 60%. That's usually the scenario where we see ourselves in most of the cases. This is in the size of the generators and the setups that we usually work with in MSF. So we are talking about setups from 50 to 250 kilowatt needs, right? Peak needs. So yeah, we usually come up with these hybrid solutions with solar penetration between 50, 60. Otherwise, your size and everything, your battery size would be just too big.
Thank you very much. So we need to be ambitious, but also pragmatic in the field in order to move forward and to address climate change issues, resilient issues, but also, of course, being pragmatic on the field, on not still ensuring the humanitarian mission of that many of our attendees here have. Okay, thank you very much to our speakers here today. It was great to have you. It was great to have all your recommendations. It's important to know for our attendees that if you want to contact our speakers, Mark, Tanya, and I guess also Iñaki, please go ahead. We are really on this together, and we need to share our expertise, experiences, our names of companies if we have in some countries also to help each other. So please go ahead and reach out to Mark, Tanya, and Iñaki. And on my side, I will thank a lot again the speakers and the attendees today, and also the team, especially the operational team for our webinar today, Zanika, Pascal, and Pierre. Thank you very much for you all, to you all, sorry. And the next webinar will be on April 6th, and it should be on green finance, how to engage into this process of green finance in our different organizations. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice afternoon.